So in my 20s, I was a Rose. In my 30s, I was a Dorothy. So now that I'm in my 40s, I think I really need to have my Blanche years before I turn into Sophia. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my masculine feminine energies breakdown series with a classic TV show, The Golden Girls. I actually had this TV show on my breakdowns list because this is probably my favorite TV show of all time. I was gonna do it a little bit further down the road because I did just do my Sex and the City breakdown and there are gonna be some overlaps. But with the recent death of the beloved Betty White, I really wanted to do this video in tribute to her, and plus I feel like we're all feeling a little bit of Golden Girls nostalgia. So I actually thought this was the perfect time to look at the masculine feminine energies within the show, and especially the feminine archetypes. So if you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. I have a lot of videos talking about this topic, but we all have a core energy. That's the energy that we're most ourselves in, and we can actually be in wounded or healed versions of either energies, and both of these energies have archetypes within them, and we actually all have all the archetypes within us. Some of them can be healed, some of them can be wounded, and some of them are usually stronger in certain people than other people, but we can tap into any of them whenever we need to. And the Golden Girls is actually an example of 4 characters that actually do demonstrate a lot of the feminine archetypes. If you are not familiar with what I mean by the feminine archetypes, I have a video breaking down all of the healthy versions of the feminine archetypes. That would be in my Legally Blonde video, which I'll link to this one. And I actually have a video talking about all of the wounded feminine archetypes. That would be my Sex and the City video. But today we are going to look at the Golden Girls. This TV show has such a special place in my heart. I will admit I did watch it when it originally aired, but I was really young and I don't think I fully appreciated the show at the time. It wasn't actually until I watched it more in syndication when I was in my 20s. I was living alone, I was going through a really dark time, and this show was like comfort food for me. It's just, when I watch this show, it feels like I'm getting like a big hug, or like I'm wrapping myself in a warm blanket. Like, it's so comforting for me. And I actually return to watching the show whenever I need to feel comforted. An interesting fact, I did actually just start watching the series again recently, and I was actually watching an episode of the show when I looked at my phone and saw the news that Betty White had passed away. So I was like watching her on the Golden Girls when I found out that she had passed on. So that's actually a moment that I will always remember. If you haven't seen the Golden Girls, then I highly recommend that you watch it. Watch this breakdown first and then watch the series. I believe it's available on Hulu. I don't know if it's available anywhere else. And I have it on DVD because I'm old, but whatever. And watch the series. It's really great. I will say there are a few things that, I mean, you have to take it for the time period that it's in. I mean, it was very ahead of its time, but there are some things in it that people may find a little bit triggering. So before we get started, when we're talking about feminine energy, and particularly in the feminine archetypes, there is a school of thought that believes that women have 3 stages. People believe that there's a certain aspect of the archetypes where women are the maiden archetype in their youth, and then when they become a mother, in whatever way they become a mother, they let go of the maiden and they enter into the mother. And then once they're done with their, you know, they've raised children or they're finished with their childbearing years, they move into the crone phase in their life. And that those happen, and like you move through one and then you let go of one and then you move into the other phase. There's another school of thought that's the one that I'm more inclined to believe, that you can actually embody the maiden, the mother, and I don't call it the crone, I prefer calling it the wise woman. Those are 3 of the divine feminine archetypes, and I do believe that you can actually embody all of those archetypes throughout your life at any given time. And I don't really think that it necessarily has to do with age or what phase of life that you are in. I'm sure that there are aspects of it, you know, it's easier for you to stay in a wide-eyed innocent maiden energy when you are in your youth. It's easier for you to be in mother energy if you are an actual mother. You know, your wisdom and your wise woman is definitely going to get stronger with age. I believe you can tap into all those archetypes at any stage in your life, depending on who you are and which ones you need to. So that's more my philosophy on it. And I think that this show is actually a really great example of women who are embodying different feminine archetypes in a later phase in their life. One thing I want to note about this show is the time period that the show was created in. It was actually not designed to be marathoned through. And each individual episode was written sort of as its own little story. The show was not great with continuity, I will say. As much as I love the show, the continuity in it was actually really off. And I'm gonna look at these characters from kind of their archetypes overall, but you may very well find little examples in certain episodes that maybe I missed that argue against what I'm saying. I'm just gonna go with sort of the overarching archetypes and personalities of these characters. So let's start with Sophia. Sophia was played by Estelle Getty. She was actually portraying an 80-year-old woman, but she was actually much younger. She was playing an older character. Sophia is Dorothy's mother. She is your traditional New York Sicilian Italian, very traditional old school Italian Catholic mother. If you're from the northeast part of the United States, you know what I'm talking about. She's pretty much like every grandmother in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, or Rhode Island. Just saying. Sophia definitely is the wise woman. She is what some people would call like the crone character. I prefer to think of it as the wise woman. She is not a very educated woman. They allude to that several times in the series, that she doesn't have much education, but she's a lot of wisdom, and she imparts that wisdom in stories, anecdotes. Some are obviously not real, some, you know, she's a very, very active imagination, but there's lessons in everything she talks about. So she really does embody that wisdom of the wise woman. That is really her overwhelming feminine archetype.
If you're so angry with him, tell him. You don't have to kill him.
I know, but I want to.
Dorothy, anger is a lot like a piece of shredded wheat caught under your dentures. If you leave it there, you get a blister, and you gotta eat Jell-O all week. If you get rid of it, the sore heals, and you feel better.
Anger is like a piece of shredded wheat.
You want poetry? You listen to Neil Diamond. You want good advice? You listen to your mother.
She does have a lot of wounding, though. She has a lot of, I would call it a very masculine shield. As much as she is a mother, she's a grandmother and a mother, she doesn't have as much of a warmth about her. She's not really warm and nurturing. I don't really think she embodies the mother energy much at all. She is very sarcastic, she's very biting. She can even be really cruel. That's actually I would say one of the things that I find the most difficult about this show to watch. As much as I love the show, she insults Dorothy, her daughter, a lot. She insults all of them, but particularly with her own daughter, she's just really biting with her. And you know that Dorothy has a lot of insecurity issues. I'm gonna get to Dorothy in a minute, but you know that probably is at the root of it. And I think that that's Sophia's way of like not really knowing how to connect with people, so that it's a bit of a shield for her. It's a way of protecting herself from getting too close to people, which is very much a masculine shield. It's usually an indication of a lot of wounding. You know, she's a tiny woman, but she's tough. She's a tough woman. Sophia is widowed, and we do meet her husband in a few flashbacks, and we hear about her deceased husband, Sal. The interesting thing about that is you get the impression from Sal, from what little we know about him, not that he was a bad guy, but that he, for one, he had a gambling addiction, which is usually a very strong indication of wounded feminine energy. You know, a lot of lack of self-control. You get the impression he wasn't super motivated. Not necessarily that he was a bad guy, but like Sophia really had to wear the pants in the relationship. It's very common when one partner, particularly when it's the male partner, has a lot of feminine wounding, which very often comes out in addiction problems, lack of ambition, lack of self-control or self-discipline, that kind of stuff. It's very common for the other partner, particularly if it's the female partner, to end up with a lot of masculine wounding, to end up being very controlling, because if the partner who has, let's say, the addiction or something, or doesn't have any self-discipline, if they're out of control, the other partner is going to get an obsessive need to control, right? She's going to have to control the situation, and she's probably going to have a lot of resentment, which is going to end up coming out in those sort of like jabs and biting comments, right? That's putting that shield up of protection, of like, I don't totally trust this person and their energy, and particularly in their masculine energy, because they're not really showing their masculine energy. They're being very wounded feminine. So it would cause the other partner to sort of put up a masculine shield, like they have to be in their masculine energy, and it's probably pretty draining on them, especially if that's not their core energy. I have a lot of videos where I talk about the wounded, like a wounded feminine energy in men and wounded masculine energy in women. So you can go back and look at some of those videos to learn more about that. That's actually a really common dynamic though in relationships, particularly even today. Now, because we don't really know what Sophia was like before she got married or what it was like when she met her husband, we don't know if, like, say Sophia's wounded masculine energy may have existed since childhood. We don't really know what her relationship was like with her parents. And if she's always had that, or it's something that's come from her youth, or, you know, growing up in Sicily. She does talk a lot about the difficulties of growing up in Sicily, stuff like that. If that wounding was there, it may have been why she attracted a partner in a husband who was more in a wounded feminine, because like those opposites are going to attract. Or if it was a matter of, you know, they were young and they weren't fully developed into themselves, and, you know, her husband developed this addiction. He ended up falling into a wounded feminine energy, and then she created this wounded masculine energy to counteract that. We don't know how far back it went, but it is very common for partners to end up in that kind of dynamic of like opposite energy wounding. And Sophia obviously has that, and she keeps that masculine shield up with everybody in her life, which is why she's sort of very biting, very cutting, which is entertaining for the show, but it's not really healthy to be that. You know, and I know that we kind of have this kind of idea of like, oh, the older grandma, and they try to play it off like, well, she's had a stroke, so she can't censor what she says, and it's for humor for the show, but it's not really a healthy place to be in, and it's not really great for making really like healthy, loving connections with people. And we have Dorothy. Dorothy is Sophia's daughter. She's played by B. Arthur. B. Arthur's always presented herself as more of a masculine energy. She's very tall, she's very statuesque, she's got a very gruff voice. She does present herself as more masculine. I would consider Dorothy to be more of a wounded wise woman, whereas Sophia embodies this sort of like inner wisdom. Dorothy is very educated, she's very knowledgeable, she's very book smart. Nothing wrong with that, that's a great thing to be, but she's very braggy about it. She's got like an air of pretension about it, of like, I know more than other people know. It's a way of proving herself. It's similar to, in my Sex and the City breakdown, it's similar to a Miranda. Like, having book smarts and having knowledge is great, especially in certain areas of life. But if you have that solely for the purpose of showing off to people that you have that knowledge, and you don't know how to translate that knowledge into actual wisdom, into actually using it to create something, or Dorothy is a teacher using that to teach people. If you are just using it to inflate your ego and prove to people that you're smart, that tends to be more wounding. It's not necessarily coming from like a healthy place, as opposed to attaining knowledge to then translate it into building something, creating something, teaching people, helping people, you know, translating it into actual like wisdom. That's more of the healthy way of using it. Dorothy very much has a masculine shield up as well. She's very biting, she's very judgmental. She does have a serious wall up, although I do think she's a little bit warmer with her friends on the show. She clearly has a lot of issues with men, distrust of men, and that's understandable if you think about it. Dorothy is actually the only character who is divorced, and her husband is still living. Stan is a reoccurring character on the show. Stan is, oh my god, he is just the epitome of a wounded feminine male. Like, it's so exaggerated. You get the impression he's no self-control with his sex drive. He's basically just trying to sleep with any woman that will have him, and he's always chasing somebody younger to suit his ego. You know, he leaves his marriage to go off with a stewardess and live on Maui. You know, you get the impression he's horrible with his business. Even his business is in like novelty sales. Like, he's selling like kids stuff. You know what I mean? He's clearly never actually grown out of sort of that like child youthfulness and actually like stepped into his masculine energy as an adult. I actually talk about that in my masculine archetypes video, which is my Cousin Vinny review. And it's interesting how it's referenced. We do meet Stan's mother, Dorothy's mother-in-law, once in one episode. She seems like a very cruel woman, to be honest with you. But you hear about Dorothy referencing her mother-in-law. You never hear about Stan's father. So you get the impression that Stan never had a father figure that actually ever initiated him into manhood, which is why he's sort of stuck in this perpetual Peter Pan type, like refusing to grow up little boy syndrome, right? He also, of course, you know, him and Dorothy got married very young because she was pregnant. So, you know, he kind of got thrown into, as well as Dorothy, into this sort of adult life at a very young age. They never seemed to initiate into adulthood properly. So you can see where, you know, Dorothy living in that environment with this perpetual child essentially would put her in a very wounded masculine shield up. She wasn't safe in that marriage. She had a husband who was fooling around. He was bad with money. He wasn't very good in bed, apparently. He was always chasing his ego. That would put her in a very unstable position, and they were married for a very long time. And you can really see where she would build that wall up, particularly around men, and have trouble relating to men. Like, that's all totally understandable.
Now what's wrong?
I lost it, Dorothy.
You never had it, Stanley.
The business. I don't know what I'm going to do. 22 years of sweat and blood, and suddenly it's all flushed down the toilet like a snotty ball of Kleenex.
You could always write poetry for a living.
I do find it interesting, though, that you don't find out too much about Dorothy's relationship to her father, but because we know about her father from Sophia's stories and stuff, the fact that her father was, you know, he had a gambling addiction, he was more of a passive type husband. The fact that then Dorothy ended up with a husband who was like even more in a wounded feminine energy. And then when we meet Dorothy's kids throughout the series, her son has that very kind of like, just, you know, playing around, kind of, you know, perpetual, like, just traveling musician, not wanting to settle down, has trouble with commitment, that kind of thing, doesn't want any responsibilities. And we also meet Dorothy's daughter, who we find out, you know, marries a guy who has an affair, repeats the patterns of her father. There's generational stuff that's going on in this series that's like textbook stuff. Like, at some point you really hope that somebody like breaks the generational curse and doesn't keep repeating this pattern. But this pattern of like men being like in this very wounded feminine energy, and the women being very sort of like hardened in their masculine energy, not a healthy masculine energy, but a really wounded, hardened, like masculine protective shield up kind of energy. It's so common nowadays, but the fact that just in that family dynamic, it's a pattern that just keeps repeating. I will say though about Dorothy, as much as I do think she is in a very wounded masculine phase, I do think she has indications, you know, her the importance she puts to her friendships, and I do think she really does want love and connection. Like, I do think that she has feminine energy within her. I think she's just got so much of a shield up. I mean, her mother's always insulting her. Her ex-husband's always made her feel not good enough. I mean, you can really see where Dorothy would have some serious issues that she'd be working through. So like, there's no judgment at all in this situation. But she definitely does have a lot of wounding. I will say Dorothy is very, very much in her huntress energy, and she channels that as protection and to protect her friends. She's very much like that warrior who wants to step forward, and she's not afraid to speak her mind. She's not afraid to speak up when she feels like someone is there's an injustice, especially against her friends. When somebody threatens her friends, she's very much that warrior, that huntress energy that is willing to step up and fight for those that she loves. Like, that's definitely a strength that Dorothy has throughout this whole series.
And I'm gonna tear you apart.
Listen, you punk! You want to fight with someone, you're gonna have to fight with me. But I warn you, I did time in Attica.
Attica's a men's prison.
I know. I was there a year before they found out.
Sorry, Chief. I didn't mean to ruffle your feathers.
Oh, Dorothy, that was magnificent. How did you ever pull that off?
I work in the public school system. It's not that different from this.
Now Blanche. Blanche is just, it's funny, when I was trying to find clips from the show, I was like, oh my god, Blanche has so many great lines. She's so good. Like, she's so luxurious. That's actually why I wore a robe today, because Blanche always has the most glamorous robes. Blanche is the epitome of the lover. She's so feminine. She's very much a lover energy. It's funny how many people compare her to a Samantha Jones, and I talked a lot about Samantha and her wounded lover energy in my Sex and the City review. Blanche does have a little bit of wounding around her lover energy, but she's much more embodied in a healthy version of lover energy than Samantha Jones. Samantha Jones's lover energy is about sex. It's about distracting herself from feeling other things through sex. It's also about her like trying to get even with men through like getting them for sex before they get her for sex. Like there's a lot of bitterness in her demeanor about like not really liking men. She just wants to use them for sex, the way she feels like maybe she's been used for sex. Whereas Blanche loves men. Like she legitimately loves men. She loves masculine energy. She loves everything about manly masculine energy.
I love a tight man. Tight man with cast iron pecs. Thighs that could choke a bear. Butt you could eat breakfast off of. Then the two of us with... Rose, when did you get in?
And she loves sex from a sense of she's sexually turned on by masculine energy so much. And she's turned on by life. Like just, I mean, anything turns her on. Like she can get so turned on and find like joy and pleasure in everything. Like she's just amazing at that.
Blanche, you could get aroused by Humpty Dumpty.
Are you kidding? All the king's horses and all the king's men. Handsome men with deep dark eyes and powerful thighs and muscles and big old cod pieces.
Blanche, how do you make it through an omelet?
Now granted, there are plenty of times throughout the series when Blanche uses male attention as a way to distract her from things she doesn't want to deal with. So it's not like she doesn't have some wounding in that area. And, you know, I do believe there's at least one episode where she actually lets a man treat her not so well just because she doesn't want to not have a man in her life, which to me that episode always felt kind of out of character. You know, she does tend to allude to the fact that she ends up with very shallow men who just want her for sex. So, you know, she's not perfect, but I do think that she embodies so much more of a healthy lover energy. And it's not just, again, about sex. It's just, you know, she's always the way she dresses. She dresses in very sensual fabrics. She eats very sensual foods. Like she's all about the senses, the very sensual, the pleasures of life. And like she's very attuned to her own inner sexual energy. Blanche also has an air of wounded queen energy. She's very, very confident, which is amazing. Her confidence does leap into arrogance, and it does leap into selfishness, into sort of like catering to her ego, and she very often puts her own needs above other people's needs. As much as she does care for and love her friends, she does have a hard time dealing with her ego when it comes to sort of that like overconfidence. Confidence is great. Queen energy is great. She moves a little bit more into wounded queen energy as far as more being not always leading with the best intentions of other people, so to speak. You also kind of get the impression that she wasn't really a very nurturing, active mother. She was sort of very much in her own ego about her own stuff and her own needs. That's why she doesn't seem to have the best relationship with her kids now that they're grown. So as much as I admire Blanche's confidence, I mean, it's exaggerated for the show, but it does slip into some wounded queen arrogance and just being stuck in your ego. Interesting thing about Blanche, I actually read Rue McClanahan's autobiography, and she said a few interesting things, just a lot of interesting things about the show and the dynamic and stuff. One of the things that I've heard her say before was she did not believe that Blanche was a slut. You know, Blanche slept around, she had a reputation for having a lot of men, but that Rue McClanahan did not believe that Blanche was a slut per se, is that she believes that Blanche was so in love with her husband. Blanche is widowed in the series, and that she was so in love with her husband that she is just searching for that same love in another man, and it keeps coming up short. So I think that is some wounding, really. It's kind of a nice thought, I think. Blanche does put her late husband up on a pedestal, and you do get the impression, even though we only meet him once in a dream sequence, that he is just a very dashing gentleman, like a dashing southern gentleman, very masculine energy, that she was very feminine energy in that relationship, and that they did have a really good relationship. Although you do find out that he had an affair, so there were some issues there, obviously. I mean, I think she may idealize him a bit much because, you know, because he's passed on, and she was so in love with him. But they did seem to have a really great masculine feminine dynamic, at least the way that it's alluded to. It is also interesting how one thing that a lot of people get bothered by when they watch the show, like now, is that Sophia makes a lot of like slut shaming comments to Blanche. And it's interesting how, I mean, I'm not super sensitive to that kind of stuff because I get it for what it is, but I do know that Rue McClanahan said actually in her book that she made the decision when the show first started that she was going to react, her character, she was going to have Blanche react to Sophia's jabs in a very like playful, like, oh, she's a sweet old lady and she's just playing with me and she's doing it because she loves me kind of way. And so she doesn't let those insults get to her, which I think is one of the reasons why I find Sophia's insults to Blanche easier to take, because it's more, it's taken in more of a playful way, particularly because Blanche is a much more confident character, whereas when Sophia jabs Dorothy, partly because it's her daughter and partly because Dorothy, you know, has so many insecurities already, to me I find that harder to watch. Just a little note that I noticed when I watched the show. And now let's get to Rose, played by Betty White. And Betty White is, oh, she's iconic. She's just so iconic. And Rose is so iconic. Rose is, she is the perpetual maiden.
Let me tell you about a lesson that I learned when I was a little girl in St. Olaf. If you hold a bird gently, the bird will stay. But if you squeeze the bird, his eyes will bug out. And Mr. Pet Shop owner gets very huffy and he won't let you touch the birds anymore.
I think she's evidence that you can embody your maiden energy throughout your entire life. She's got so much wide-eyed optimism. She's just, she believes in people. She believes in love. Her heart is open. She is just, she's so loving and trusting and warm and nurturing. She does have a lot of mother energy in her as well. She wants to mother animals. She wants to mother her friends. Like, she's got a very like warm, nurturing, loving energy in her. She's a little bit more uptight. She's not quite as sexually free. Definitely not as sexually free as Blanche, because not many people are. She's a little bit less comfortable with her sexuality and expressing that. She's also widowed as well, and she has a very idealistic idea of her late husband. We don't actually meet him at all in the show, even in flashbacks or anything like that. She puts him up on such a pedestal that it's kind of almost impossible for any man to live up to that. But yet she still loves so much. Like she loves so much with an open heart that you don't really know if her late husband was really the iconic man she portrays him to be. You do get the impression that he was a very kind of your Midwestern farm boy. She was a Midwestern farm girl, and they were like childhood sweethearts, and you know, fell in love and you know, raised a family in the Midwest and had this very traditional life. So you get the impression that, you know, somebody like Rose would probably have married somebody who was quite masculine, because she is still so in her feminine energy. She does have a competitive streak that comes out sometimes where you see a little bit of her huntress warrior energy kind of peek through here and there. But for the most part, it's just a very warm, very maiden and mother energy. She's more of like the Starlet, I would say, if you're doing like a Sex and the City comparison. Less of a wounded and less of like a I need a savior kind of a thing, and just more in that wide-eyed and embodying life. Betty White was actually apparently quoted as saying that she did not believe that Rose was dumb. She just thought she was perpetually naive. And I think that can happen sometimes when you have so much open-hearted love, which is not a bad thing. It does sometimes lead you into not being able to discern when people are really being truthful with you, if you always believe that everybody is honest, because as we all know, not everybody is honest. But also not letting, when people are dishonest with you, shut you down and close your heart, because that really just hurts you more than it hurts them. Rose does have a little bit of wounding in the sense that she's very much a people pleaser, which indicates a little bit of wounded feminine energy. She needs everybody to like her. She sometimes goes out of her way to make people like her. She sometimes gives too much of herself to help people, and doesn't actually, she's not really always able to set boundaries. She actually ends up with some health problems on occasion because she doesn't know how to slow down and tell people that she can't do everything for them. It's a little bit gives too much of herself and doesn't actually like give herself some time to rest and recharge. So there's a little bit of wounding in that area when it comes to Rose. Rose also has the most reoccurring boyfriend in the series, which would be Miles. Miles is very much as he's not a masculine character in the sense of, you know, being a tough guy. He's a college professor. He has a very like grounded sense to him. You know, he has a very practical sense to him. He lets Rose kind of be her sort of free-flowing self, tell her stories, do her thing. He loves and accepts her for who she is. He fully sees her for who she is and lets her express herself as who she really is, and creates a very safe container for her.
How you can stand listening to me and all my ridiculous stories.
Your stories are very refreshing, Rose. Look, it's like driving in the country and getting lost. You may not know where you are, but you always have a good time finding your way out.
And he has a little bit of wounding. He's kind of a cheapskate. He's got some body image issues throughout the series at certain points. But that's a really great example of like, you can have masculine energy in a man and it doesn't have to look like this very like macho tough guy energy. It can look more quiet and subdued, but he does have a very grounded stillness that allows her feminine energy to flow, and he provides a safe space for that energy to flow and fully sees her for who she is. So I hope that you enjoyed this breakdown as much as I enjoyed making it. If you love the series like I love the series, then let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Tell me who your favorite character is on the show. I really, really love the show, and it will always have a special place in my heart. So to all the ladies on the Golden Girls and to Betty White, thank you for being a friend. If you have any questions, comments, requests, anything, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Love to hear from you. Love your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. You can follow me on all my social media accounts. The links will be in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.